going to be the first to wish you a good afternoon. Stu had the pleasure of wishing you a good morning, and it's my pleasure to wish you all a good afternoon. Stu introduced me. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've had the opportunity to work with many MS patients during my career. And I'm here today, and I wanted to thank Stu and MS Views for the wonderful work they do, and for our opportunity to be able to share with you our experiences and our expertise. All right, before I start my topic, I'm going to ask those of you that are family members, caregivers, friends, support people, if you would, just take a minute for me and just stand up so I know who you are. Let me see you. Okay, that's awesome. I want you all to look around, okay? Because I want you to realize something, is you're not alone. You're not alone in this as a family member. And on behalf, you can sit down, thank you. On behalf of MS Views, on behalf of all the MS patients, we want to thank you all for all of your support, because you all really help us get through this. So thank you. Okay, it's real easy for me to stand up here and lecture to you and tell you about what the impact of MS is on the families. But I'm going to ask a little help today. I need some help. I would like to know what you as family members, caregivers, and significant others experience. What is the impact that MS has had on you and your family? So if you would, just raise your hand, I'll call upon you. Yes, ma'am, please. This woman up front said, okay, that's fine. Yeah, friends or caregivers as well. Said the unpredictability. I'm going to apologize right now for my spelling. I do have a doctorate degree. It's not in English or literature, and so I don't have spell check. So that's the only one. That's the one they gave me. So we're just going to do that. The unpredictability of the disease and the difficulty in making plans. What else? What are the other things you all experience that impact you? Yes, ma'am, back there. So for you, the demand, one of the impacts for you is that your life becomes unpredictable. Okay. So this would be the unpredictability of the disease, and we'll call the demands. All right, what else? What are some of the other, yes ma'am? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Change of mood. Are you referring to your change of mood or the change of mood of the MS patient? Sir, I'm really sorry we had to disclose that. What else? What else is the impact?
Like I'm always looking for a handyman to do something that he would do before.
Okay.
And there's some things that even if I want to do, I cannot do.
You know, this is an important issue.
Always looking for a handyman.
So,
anyone knows a good one?
Anyone have cards for a handyman?
When they're asking or saying something, we would ask you to repeat so that way everybody else knows what's doing.
Okay. Yeah, this woman mentioned that the need for a handyman. And one of the impacts, we're going to talk about that, is basically change of roles, right? That there are some roles that have changed. Anything else that comes to mind? Yes, ma'am. Whoa. That's awesome. This woman mentioned the apprehension or fear of the future. What's going to happen? We'll call that fear, because that's a reality. Anything else come to mind? Yes, ma'am.
My kids have all these worries about
Okay. Mention the worrying about what's going to happen, that the family member worries about, am I going to fall? Fear, we'll just broaden that to worry. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not a caregiver, I'm a patient, but the economic aspect.
Wow. Another impact is the economic costs. Absolutely. Anything else come to mind? All right. Well, these are all very, very, very important and impact caregivers, and hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit later in my talk how we deal with these issues, the impact, and what we can do as family members and caregivers to cope with these factors. All right, what we're going to talk a little bit about today is the impact of MS in the family. We kind of alluded to that. The challenges we face as family members and caregivers, how do we cope, the consequences, and also to talk about the resources in the community. And, I'm so glad to hear Jennifer, right, that Jennifer is available. And please, as caregivers, we don't take care of ourselves. And what you just heard is Jennifer's services is available to you all, and avail yourself of that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So, certainly we know that the impact of MS on the family, and we've alluded to this in some of the things that you all have shared with me, is that MS is a chronic disease, it's unpredictable, it's expensive, it elicits emotions, it costs energy and time on the family. I kind of conceptualize and think about this, that MS is like the uninvited guest that shows up at our doorstep and that consumes every resources of the family and never leaves. And think about that. How many of y'all had that experience where family members come down and, overstay their welcome? And we know that's time limited. But we know how that impacts the family. And that's what MS does. It's a chronic disease that comes uninvited and affects every aspect of the family. It's unpredictable. Certainly we heard this morning about the unpredictability of the disease, and it's burdensome throughout the course of the disorder, especially when it's so unpredictable. We don't know when symptoms will flare up. We don't know when we'll have be in remission, and that in itself takes a toll on the family. And that's exactly what we saw, one of y'all shared, with the unpredictability. It's difficult to make plans. How do you plan a vacation? How do you plan a trip when you don't know if there's going to be a flare-up? And certainly, it costs time, money, family resources. It's energy and emotions. It's inexpensive. Medications are very, very expensive. Doctor visits, co-payments can be very, very expensive. We'll talk also a little bit about what you all as caregivers, what your profile is, and how this really, really affects you. We also know that not only does the diagnosis of MS have an emotional effect on the patient, it certainly has an emotional impact on the family members, the caregivers. And this is something we don't always talk about. We identify that the MS patient's going to go through a series of emotions. We don't think about the family, including children within the family, what they might go through. And you know what? And the one thing to understand is no matter what that reaction is, it's not right or wrong. We all are entitled to our own feelings, our own reactions, as is every family member. So remember that our emotions, whether we're a caregiver or within the family, are not right or wrong. Some of those emotions are loss, grief, anxiety, anger, shock, denial, confusion, isolation, fear, panic, sadness, are all common feelings that every family member may experience. Expected. They're not abnormal. Also, as we talked about, or someone brought up, that the impact is energy. It zaps the energy of the MS patient, as we heard earlier this afternoon, but it also affects the family's energy. It's a drain on the family's resources. There's constant changes, adjustments. We need to find alternative ways to deal with life situations. Time. We know that MS can slow the individual down, but also slows the family down. It's, again, making plans. We need to account for our time. All right, what are the challenges to the family in coping with MS? When we look at, when we look at MS, we certainly see that families have different styles of coping. And we develop these systems as part of our family. We learn how to cope with things, resolve conflicts within the family. And so often, it doesn't change when we have a chronic disease within the family. But that chronic disease can really tax our coping strategies. And as I said, most families develop their own coping mechanisms. And we've kind of, in our field, labeled different ways we as families cope. One thing we talk about is instrumental coping, or problem solving. This is where the family looks at a problem and they solve it. They sit down, there may be family meetings, etc., and we resolve the conflict or the problem by looking at solutions. Another way families deal with problems is they become emotionally reactive. They respond emotionally. They don't look at the problem. They don't look at what they can do about it. They just respond emotionally. The other coping style we see is active, and the last one is avoidance. And this is the one that a lot of families do. Well, it's not a problem. We won't deal with it. We'll just make like that an uninvited guest is not here. We'll make like it's not in the house and deal with it that way. And obviously, the most productive way of coping, we'll talk a little bit that, is the problem-solving approach. And we need to also recognize that within the family, deal with things differently than the whole family does. We all have our own individual needs. And so what happens is when there is a chronic disease such as MS within the family, it takes up so much of the resources of the family that individual members of the family's needs may not necessarily be met or addressed or avoided. And so families and members of the family, particularly children, may experience feelings of isolation, rejection, abandonment, etc. The other thing that's really interesting, families develop a rhythm. Okay? I wake up in the morning, I know what I'm going to do, I grab my cup of coffee, I read my paper, I take out the trash when I'm supposed to. My wife may do her chores. We've developed a rhythm, and we do that in families. We all have our roles, our responsibilities. We've developed that rhythm. And it's a day-to-day rhythm. It gets disrupted when there's a chronic disease in the family. And the reason why I'm pointing these things out to you is so you realize that this is not abnormal, and so that you can recognize it and not be resentful or angry, but recognize it, and then we'll talk about what we can do about it. Certainly, the most important component of healthy families is communication. And when we have a chronic disease, we see there's a disruption in communication of the family. Most often, one person becomes the center of the family. And so the communication between members gets neglected. It's critical that families learn to communicate and continue to communicate. So we'll talk about what we do about that, but I was really interested. Who are you all? Who are these caregivers? Who are the significant others? Okay? And this was interesting. 47% of you work full-time. 13% part-time. 11% are self-employed. So how does MS impact you, caregivers, individually? 27% had a loss of personal income. 46% were impacted negatively in their work life. 30% had to take time off. 15% reduced their hours at work. 16% needed accommodations, like having to work different hours. 10% stopped work. 6% were forced to change careers. 6% took a less demanding job. So what you can see is MS not only impacts the family, but it affects the caregivers individually as well. This was phenomenal to me. And this was really interesting too. I was fortunate. I was involved in the field of oncology and treating cancer patients, and was somewhat involved with a study at the University of Miami, and we were looking at the impact of the diagnosis of cancer on people. And what we found was, on a large percentage, much higher than we thought, that the diagnosis had a positive impact with those people. They started to reprioritize their life, change their life, evaluated their lives, and made changes in their life. Guess what? MS caregivers tend to be very positive people. How cool is that? You all are really positive people. Pat yourselves on the back. 44% of you in survey strongly agreed that you cope well. 47% somewhat agree. That is 91% of you all out there are saying you're doing okay. That's incredible. I guarantee you, if I asked a poll of people in the general population, are you doing okay? 91% wouldn't say, I'm doing okay. So you all have demonstrated some strengths that are just not seen in the general population. You have resources. Listen to this. 30% of you all have said that you strongly agree that you become a stronger person as a caregiver. 55% Someone agree. So in general, 85% of you have said dealing with MS in your family has resulted in you becoming a stronger person. That's pretty crazy. So think about that. So often we look at the negative effects of what things do to us. But I want you to think about this. 91% agree that you're coping well. 85% say you're a stronger person. That's what it takes to deal with this as a family member, a caregiver. Reframing this. Looking at what I can do, not what I can't do. And that is being positive. All right, what are some strategies that we can do for family coping? Remember that uninvited guest? Okay? That we said taking over the whole house? You need to say to that guest, no more space. You're only going to allow you to take up as much space as that is necessary. We're going to deal with you and not let us become overwhelmed by you. We're going to deal with the MS on a day-to-day basis. You're not going to take over our whole lives. You're not going to take over our whole house. You're not going to take over our families. No more space to that uninvited desk. We're going to put it in the closet. I just thought of a bad joke. No. No, you don't want to hear my jokes. The other thing that's very important in dealing with MS is we certainly need to recognize that MS affects the activities of the family. We need to try to allow the family to maintain as many of their normal activities as they can. We need to adjust. However, the individuals in the family need to make sure and continue to do their activities. We adjust. We bring, if we're going to the soccer game, we make sure we'll bring a chair for the MS patient. We'll leave a little early. Why? Because it may take us a little longer to get to that soccer field, to walk to it. But we will not allow it to affect our activities because it's critical. Planning. Someone mentioned about the fear, the worrying. Very important for planning. So, for example, we're not going to, if we're looking for a house, we're in the housing market, we're not going to look for a two-story house. Because we know it's not a good thing to do. We need to make sure that we have a one-story house that's easy to get around. So we're going to plan, and we're going to take into consideration MS, limitations, and we're going to plan as a family. We're going to plan for the worst, but we're going to hope for the best. Planning becomes important. Someone mentioned that the unpredictability. How do we plan vacations? Well, you still need to plan, but you have to have contingencies. So what do? We buy traveler's insurance. So for a small cost, we are insured and we feel secure. So planning becomes very, very critical. Some tips. Becomes really important that the family learns about the disease. It becomes important that you have good communication. So often I'm asked, well, how do we tell our children? What do we tell our children? You tell them the truth. I sit with children all day long, and they'll tell me, oh, my parents are getting a divorce. Or, my dad's sick. and you do an interview with the family, and they go, oh, we're not telling the children. They know. The best way to talk with your children about the disease or family members is you ask them. It has to be age appropriate. The communication needs to be at the level of that child, or even that adult for that matter. So we're going to allow them to ask questions, and we're going to provide information at their level. We're not going to talk about brain atrophy or demyelination. They're not going to understand that, but they will understand a chronic disease. We need to keep balance in our roles and relationships. Again, if I'm an MS patient, may not any longer be able to hang the fan. Okay? So we're going to balance our roles and relationship in the families. I may need to be asking my kids to be a little more involved. They may have to take out the garbage. They may have to change their roles and responsibility. And as I said, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Don't give MS any more energy, time, or attention it needs. Make time as a family to focus on things other than MS. Make sure you have nights together, time together, where MS is not the focus, that there are other things and other activities. Take advantage of resources in your own community, such as support groups, such as social work support, etc. Wanted to just talk about a little bit how important it is that caregivers take care of themselves. There is a term called caregiver burnout, and it's very common among individuals who have been put in the role of caregivers. You all need to make sure that you have your own caring plan, that you take care of yourself, that you're able to cope with the day-to-day activities, that you create a community of carers to support yourself. I had you stand up for a reason, to realize you're not alone. Attend support groups. Get that support. You know, we always kid around and, well, I don't want to burden someone and tell them what I'm going through. It's a burden to them. It's important. Okay, it's important that you have an opportunity to vent, to get it off your chest. You need to take care of your own mental health. Understand it's okay to get help. Define the help you need and seek resources in the community. Stu, where are we at with time? Okay. So I may speak softly, but boy, you get me going. I sit and listen all day, and I go, how do you feel about that? Give me a microphone or a stage. I just love to talk. If I have one gift to give each and every one of you, and that is a philosophy I believe in life. And that is a philosophy that I think can help us get through everything. We've already heard from some of you about your fears, your worries about the future. And what my philosophy is to be here now, and that is to stay in the moment. When we think about time, and I want you to think about this when we're dealing with an illness, an unpredictable chronic illness, whether you're an MS patient, a caregiver. When we think about time, the only thing that exists is this moment. The past doesn't exist. It's gone. There is nothing I can do about the past. The future doesn't exist. It hasn't happened yet. We may plan for things, as you know, plans are our own subjective reality. It's what we would like to see happen. And so often, it doesn't. We don't have control over factors in the future. So what we do have control over is what? This moment. Only this moment. I don't have control over of anything else except this moment. If you can live your life moment to moment, you will have better control of your life, and things like MS won't affect you as much, whether you're a caregiver or a patient of MS. Thank you.